Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the demo/Q&A on securing organizations, pipelines, and integrations in Azure DevOps. Some of you, I think, there's some familiar faces here. I think, some of you actually came by our booth. We had a few good discussions we have been having the last 2 days. How is Bill going so far for all of you? Going great? You're getting a ton of new information. Yeah, are you excited? Are you excited about Azure DevOps? Great, awesome, yeah. So we want to talk about security today, right? We want to talk about all the stuff that we are doing from a security standpoint in Azure DevOps, all the investments that's happening in Azure DevOps, investments in terms of securing your integrations, investments in securing your pipelines. And then, this is a broad Q&A. If you have other questions on Azure DevOps, I'm happy to take it. Let me quickly introduce my colleague also. Before I go that, this session will be a hybrid session. So this session is live. There's also participants participating online also. So this session will be recorded and made available on demand. So by joining this session, you are consenting to be recorded, and your name, image, voice, and all that things should be part of that recording. So if that is not something you're not comfortable with, think about that. So today, I am Rajesh Ramamurthy. I'm one of the group product managers in Azure DevOps. So I run a product team that's focused on Azure DevOps platforms. And I have my colleague here, Vijay Machiraju. Vijay, can you come off the mute and turn on your camera and introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Rajesh. I am Vijay. I drive the product in pipelines and repos and boards in Azure DevOps.
I'm sure that many of you have had the opportunity to talk to Vijay in the past. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of you in the past also. So this is kind of our etiquette to how to engage, especially for audience in the room. If you have a question, please raise your hand. And by the way, my apologies. I have to introduce Dave Burnison, our moderator. Dave will help. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Dave Burnison, I'm Senior Enterprise Advocate with the Azure DevOps and the GitHub teams. So yes, I talk to all kinds of customers all the time about Azure DevOps and GitHub, and work with Vijay and Rajesh and others from the product team.
Yeah, for customers, I think Azure DevOps and GitHub may look like two different tools, but these two teams work very closely, right? We are partners. This is two great products that Microsoft has. Customers can go use whichever product they like. Customers can use GitHub. Customers can use Azure DevOps. They can use a combination of GitHub and Azure DevOps. The choice is with customers, right? I know that many of you who came by the booth, the burning question in your mind is, I heard a lot about GitHub in the keynotes and other things. I haven't heard anything about Azure DevOps. Well, Microsoft is investing in both the products, right? Microsoft is investing in GitHub heavily. Microsoft is investing in Azure DevOps. I'm going to talk to you today about, I'm going to show you some demos about all the cool stuff that we've been doing from a security standpoint. So clearly that, Microsoft is doing investments in both, right? So if you had a question about, hey, what's Microsoft doing with Azure DevOps, I can assure you that we are investing in Azure DevOps. So now we can do it in two ways, right? I could start this conversation with a few demos, or we could go straight into a Q&A and open up the Q&A. So what do you prefer? Demos followed by, okay, demos. All right. Who doesn't love the demos? All right. Some of the demos I'm going to show you is to kind of reiterate and reemphasize some of the capabilities that's available in Azure DevOps. What we notice is that we don't always do a good job of publicizing the capabilities we have in Azure DevOps. So I thought this would be a good time to kind of remind our audience, hey, some capabilities are available. If you're not taking advantage of that, I think this is a great opportunity to go take advantage of that. So the first one that I'll show you is, how many people know that there's a bunch of personal access token control plane policies that exist in Azure DevOps, using which you can control the behavior of personal access tokens. How many people are aware of this? David, that's cheating. David is part of our team, so you are aware of that? Okay. Okay, that's two. Anybody coming from? Okay, you know that, sure. Anybody from online?
Don't have anybody. Feel free to raise your hand or put a thumbs up in the chat. There we go. We see a few thumbs ups from chats.
Okay.
And a couple of not awares.
All right. So there are a few people who have heard about this, maybe even using it. Well, let's take a quick couple of minutes to show what we have here, right? So I'm going to go share my desktop here. By the way, so an hour before this this session, I started like, okay, let me go and check everything, like all the demos that I prepped. You know that demo guards are not always kind to you. This is what I see. An hour ago, oh, sorry, I thought I shared it. This is what I see, right? An hour ago, I was like, okay, let me get the org ready. Let me show all the demo. And then it's like, oh, our services are available. The reason I'm showing you is there's an outage going on in Brazil Geo, so our teams are working hard to address it. But the good news is Azure DevOps is actually deployed in 8 different geographies, right? Now, luckily that I have orgs in other geographies that I was able to go bootstrap that quickly. And that's the demo that I was going to show you today, right? So in case if you're not taking advantage of some of the high availability, some of the redundant capabilities that Azure DevOps has, this is a good reason to remind all of you. All right, so let me find out where this is. Okay, great. So so the path control plane policies, what we call them, are tenant level policies, right? So because once you set up these policies, this is applicable to all of your users in your tenant. Now, who can go set up these policies? There is a role in Azure called Azure DevOps Administrator. You can assign that role to individuals. You can assign that role to groups of people or a group or an Azure AD group. So you have to have that particular role if you want to come and manage these policies. So what are the policies that we have here, right? Let me quickly walk through that. So one is restrict, okay, let me see. Let me start from that, right? Restrict global personal access token. So do you know what global personal access token is, anybody?
Rajesh, could you maybe zoom in just a little bit more?
Does that work?
How's that in the back? Is that readable?
All right.
Awesome.
See, I love the Surface laptop, right? I can use it at touch. So a global personal access token is when you create a personal access token and then say that this token is available to be used in any organizations I have access to, which I will tell you it's not a good thing, right? Because what happens is you create a token, the token has access to all of your organizations, and then you check that token into a file. This is where I'm sure that you heard about, you have attended, if you have attended the sessions from my colleague about GitHub Advanced Security, guess what? In the future, GitHub Advanced Security is going to block PRs when your PRs contain secrets that you are trying to check in. But let's just say that you don't have it. So clearly, a global access token is if that token leaks, and tokens are basically credentials, right? So the surface area that you're opening up for a malicious actor to touch is actually huge, right? So how do you restrict that? You go and say, you know what? I want to restrict anybody in my company, from creating global personal access tokens. So you turn on the policy. Now, every one of this policy also comes with what we call an allow list, meaning that if a few of the people in your company needs an exception, because they're just working on something, they need a little bit of time to transition out of this, guess what? In the interim that you can put them in the allow list and then work with them to move out of this dependency. And once you are done, you can get them out of that. So likewise, there are two other things. The second one is full scoped personal access token. As you know, when you go create a personal access token, you can create a token that's specifically scoped, meaning that you have an app that's trying to read work items, right? So in this case, all you need is a personal access token that only had read work item scope, right? But generally, it means, when you are creating a personal access token, you have to go through the list, you have to select the right scope. People don't always do that, right? As developers, we want to get job done quickly. So people go and choose the full access token. Same problem, right? So here you are giving your personal access token a lot more privilege than it needs to. Now, as an admin, you have this tool. You can say that, hey, I want to restrict anybody in my company from creating a full scope personal access token. And then the third thing, this is another interesting thing is, by default, personal access tokens can be, by the default is 30 days. But you can actually go create a token that's valid up to 1 year. You can keep on extending that. And that's a problem, right? The inherent problem with personal access tokens is they are credentials that are long-lived, right? Meaning that when those credentials leak, because they are long-lived, even after you check in the credential, like if your credential is valid for, let's say, 6 months, people can come back in 3 months, they can find the credential, and they can use the credential to cause you harm. So as an admin here, what you can do is you can say, you know what, I want to enforce a maximum personal access token lifespan, and I say, you know what, I don't want anybody in my company to be creating any token more than 30 days. So these policies are available today. So all security-minded admins and developers, if you're not taking advantage of that, I do recommend you take advantage of that. Now, I want to show you another quick demo here, right? Now, how many of you have seen that the blog post we published last month about bringing support for managed identities and service principals? Dave, you saw that. OK, great. Thank you. Yeah. From online, people have, OK, we are getting some thumbs ups. Great. All right, let me show you. Let me show you, how to actually go use a managed identity instead of a personal access token. So let's go here. All right, here's an org that I have, right? The first step is that I need to actually, add that managed identity, and I need to give that managed identity some permissions. Because today what you're doing is you're using a service account or your own account, which is already permissioned within the org. Now we need to recreate that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to org settings. I'm going to go to users. We treat managed identities and service principals like users most of the time. There are a few exceptions, but mostly they all work the same as users, so it's quite easy. So I'm going to go and add so I already created a managed identity here, which is called, let's see, build demo mi user. So I'm just going to go add that here. All right, I'm going to add this. I'm going to give a license. And I'm going to add access to this build 2023 project. And then, OK, yep, I'm going to make them an admin for now. That's OK. I don't need to send an email. I've added that. Great. Now I have added a managed identity. I've given some permissions within the org. The next step I'm going to do is I have a code here, right? I have an Azure function that I created. This Azure function is actually using a personal access token. So let's just go run that right now. All right. So here is that Azure function. So I'm going to open up that Azure function, go to code and test. All right, so I'm going to say test run, add a parameter here and say title demo work item for build. All right, so looks like it's created. So let's just check that it is actually created. So I'll go to this project called Build 2023, as I said. I'll go to boards. All right, so clearly, I have used a personal access token. I've written an Azure function that's actually talking to Azure DevOps, that's creating a work item. Great. So as you can see, it's actually using a path that belongs to me. Now, what I wanted to do is I want to convert this Azure function from going from a personal access token to a managed identity. So what I'm going to do is, the good thing is all I need to do is few lines of code changes. I've already written the code changes, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to, I'm sorry?
Yeah, we still see the
oh.
Azure boards.
Yes.
Yeah.
I meant to share all that. Where is it? Thank you. Thanks for pointing that out. There you go. Great.
Awesome.
So I just uncommented a few things. So this is really going to use my managed identity, which I already set it up. So here, what I'm going to do is, and patterns here, I am going to uncomment this stuff. All right. So let me make sure that it builds correctly. Run the build task. Keeping my fingers crossed. If this doesn't work, I'll point out to David. But it should work.
Let's make sure we get the microphone so they can hear it online.
Sorry, is a managed identity, like, for those that don't know, is it similar to like a group managed service account in old Active Directory for Azure Active Directory?
It is similar to that. So in other words, the group managed service accounts are purely service accounts that you use for running apps and running services. There are two equivalent concepts in Azure. So one is service principals. Service principals are basically principals that you use to run apps. The new one is a managed identity. So those two are, you are right that those two are kind of the equivalents of your GMSA in Active Directory. Right, so it did build. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy this actually. I'm going to go to, I'm going to go here and then say, please deploy this function app. It takes around 30 to 60 seconds. I mean, if you're a developer and if you wanted to do this, if you're wondering, does it take a lot of effort? It actually doesn't, right? Of course, you have to set up the managed identity in Azure DevOps. Of course, you'll have to go set up, if you're using an Azure function or a VM, you need to provision that to have the managed identity set up. But the code changes are like really, really few lines of code changes, right? That's what you need to do. All right, it's doing something. It's publishing.
I said, well, that's running. There's been a, oh, go ahead.
Yes, so it's publishing. So, and I will tell you once it's still deploying, okay? In the meanwhile, I have already have my Azure function here. There you go. This is my Azure function. Now, just to show you, I have already set up the authentication here. The authentication. I have already assigned the build demo MI user identity to this Azure function. So now all I need to do is go to this function once I check that it is in fact published. Still deploying. It is deployed. Great. So I should be able to now open up the same code, the same code and test. Keep my fingers crossed. Okay, this is available now. I'm going to say test run. Same thing, right? It's the same functionality. I haven't changed the functionality. Demo work item using an MI. All right, so it says it's created. I'm going to go and see if it actually did. It did. As you can see, so just to show you the difference, I used a personal access, my own personal access token for the first work item. demo work item for build. And this one, as you see, I'm using a managed identity. This is how easy it is, how quick it is, for you to move from using a personal access token to a managed identity. So the good thing about using a managed identity is, one is the token that you get from Azure Active Directory is valid for 60 minutes, right? Compare 60 minutes versus 6 months worth of token, right? That's one. Second is, if your admins have set up all sorts of conditional access policies, guess what? All of those conditional access policies now will be applied before your app actually gets the token, right? So it really, enhances, your app's security, your company's security by moving away from personal access tokens to managed identities. So what's the next demo I want to show you? I'm going to leave 20 minutes for Q&A, so I will promise you that.
Is there something? We have one question here.
Oh, sure. Please.
Is there a copilot for ADO that we can use to just say, hey, make a personal access token for me, and it'll do it?
I think what I used is I went to Bing. Bing uses, ChatGPT, as you know. And I go ask a bunch of questions, says, hey, give me a code, like the code that I asked is, hey, give me a PowerShell script for me to go get an Azure AD access token. Like, 30 seconds later, it spit out the PowerShell script, which I used it to create it. Yeah, absolutely. So the next demo I'm going to show you is about pipelines. Before I do that, I want to remind one more thing, right? Again, similar to, we've been releasing a lot of configurations, a lot of settings that actually makes your organization, your pipelines more secure. As usual, we're not always doing a good job of telling you about it, something we should go fix it. I'll give you a couple of examples here, right? So this is the pipeline settings page. If you go to project pipelines, you will see these settings. So what I'm going to show a demo today is this one. So there is a setting called limit variables that can be set at queue time. So basically what this configuration setting helps you is, so your pipeline, you have a pipeline, your pipeline is written, right? It has some variables, right? But if you don't turn on this, what happens is anybody who is queuing a pipeline, they can add their own variables, right? Now, in essence, if you have a pipeline and people who are queuing the pipeline is keep on adding new variables, the right way is to go work with the pipeline author and say, hey, I think I need you to update the pipeline, add a few more variables because we need that, right? That's the right way to do it. But adding variables on queue time will open up all sorts of things because a malicious user who gets access to can put stuff in that pipeline that could lead to injections, that could lead to arbitrary code running on the pipelines. So that's why we tell customers that, hey, please go turn on this setting called limit. So I haven't turned this on. See that there's a high-risk banner. OK. See that there is a high-risk banner that shows up here. It's basically telling you, the user or the admin, that, hey, you haven't turned on this setting. Please go turn on this setting, right? Now, some admins are uncomfortable turning on the setting. Because why? No admin wants to turn on a setting, and half an hour later, like, a bunch of developers coming to their office yelling that, you broke my pipelines. I can't deploy, right? So admins are a little bit afraid about making these changes. So we wanted to help them, right? The way we help them is, before you turn a policy, right now this is only available for this policy. This is in private preview right now. We're actually testing this with customers. And if customers find this one useful, our goal is to kind of expand the same model to other high-risk settings. So basically what this does is, before you go from off to on, you want to turn what we call an audit-only mode. Like, in other words, is I want to know who's actually using this, whose pipelines will break without actually breaking it, right? So as an admin, once I know that person A ran this pipeline with added queue time variables, then I can actually go talk to that person and say, hey, why are you doing it? Let's see, if you can go talk to the pipeline author to update the pipeline, right? But at the same time, I'm not blocking, I'm not failing the build, I'm not going to block the developer. That's important, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn on the audit mode, which I've turned it on. So now what I will do is I'll go to a pipeline here. Actually, I need to show you this particular demo in a different org. let me share that again. So I have to shuffle between multiple settings here, so my apologies. Share. Okay. Am I sharing the right one? I am. Perfect. All right. So, oh, hold on. This is a different demo. Too many demos. Nope. Still on the old one. This time it's working. Okay, great. So I'm going to open up here. I have a pipeline. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this pipeline, right? When I run this pipeline, I'm also going to go add a queue time variable, right? So I'm just going to say add variable, demo variable. This is not good. So I'll create a new variable, and then I queue the build. So I'm going to go run it. All right. So let's see. It's hopefully, it should start. Okay, so it's starting to build. While it does that, let me actually go to my audit log. Now, where exactly we are telling you about this audit-only mode is if you have a violation, we're going to send an event to the audit log. As an admin, you can go check the audit log. You can download the audit log. You can filter it, right? You can do all sorts of stuff. So I'm going to go to auditing. Right. So so it's still happening. So it looks like it is not done yet. Okay. Let me go and see what's happening with the pipeline. Okay. All right. So at this point of time, we should have that information here. I did, actually. I did turn that on. That was a great question. If I go to the pipeline settings, yeah, so the audit mode is on. So it should publish. I'll come back and show you. I'll give some time. Sometimes, it takes a few seconds before the data hits the audit log. That's right. That's right. I'll come back. I don't want to hold you, but we'll come back and check that. So the third demo, while it's happening, the third demo that I want to show you is secrets, right? Pipelines uses, pipelines have a lot of secrets. You store secrets in service connections. You store those secrets to deploy to the cloud of your choice. Now, what we have done is, if Azure is your cloud of choice, guess what? You can actually create your pipelines. I mean, you can deploy your pipelines without actually storing any secrets in Azure DevOps. That's the demo that I'm going to show you next. In the meanwhile, I'll refresh it. I'll wait for that build to complete. This is the one. Great. All right. So here's my org. So here is my service connection, right? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a service connection that doesn't actually store the secrets. So what we are calling this as workload identity. So what I'll do is I'll go create a new service connection. It's an ARM service connection. So as you can see, there are two more new authentication methods that's showing up here. So one is the workload identity federation automatic. This is the case you are allowing us to actually create a service principal on your behalf and set up the the workload identity trust. But if you have already set up one, you are free to go use it. So in this case, just for the demo reasons, I'm actually going to go create one. All right, I'm going to go next. So I'll choose a subscription here. All right, I want to use the subscription. Let me call it, demo MI. I'm going to save it. Now what it's doing is it's setting up a connection. Once it's set up a connection, let's go take a look at that service principal. Hopefully it'll finish successful. Yes, it is working. So I am going to go take it out. Click the Manage Service Principal. So I'm going to go to the Azure portal to take a look at the service principal. So in the past, when you're using service principals, you used two models, right? One is you used assert or you used a secret. Now, guess what? This service principal is not going to use any of that. It's actually going to use federated identity trust, right? So I go to certs and secrets. Let me make sure that I'm using the right thing. Okay, there you go. So federated credentials. So this is where we have created using an OIDC Connect. We have set up a trust. So here, what this will allow Azure pipelines to do is, Azure pipelines will now, instead of using it hasn't stored a secret. If your pipeline is using this particular service connection, this is a service connection without a secret. At runtime, what's going to happen is it's going to use the trust and go ask Azure AD and say, hey, give me a token. Now, Azure AD, based on the federated trust that we have set up, it's going to call back and validate that it's the right workload identity that's calling it. Once it validates that, it is going to give us a token, and we'll use the token to actually deploy whatever that you want to deploy to your Azure resources. So let's open up this credential quickly. So as you can see, there's no secret. So this is exactly, this is our callback, right? This is the callback URL that Azure AD is going to talk to us to validate that we are in fact the workload that it's giving the token to. So anyhow, so those are the demos. In the meanwhile, I'm sure that you're waiting to see if that build successfully completed. Let me actually go check that. Yes, it did successfully do that. So I'll wrap up the demos with just showing you the last piece of that, and then we'll open it up for all Q&As that you have. So I'm going to share again. Okay. So, all right. As you can see, there is an audit log event that landed here. As an admin, it says, a run of this particular pipeline has defined a variable that are not marked as settable at queue time. So it's now clearly, now if I download this audit log, which I can export this audit log to a CSV. And then if I open up that audit log, I know I'll have to share that. Once I open up, I'll share that too. Okay. Let me quickly share you that. All right, so this is exactly what I'm going to show you. As you can see, this is exactly the pipeline's variable set at queue time. Now, if you go through that, if you go through the data that we have published as part of that audit event, as an admin, what are the things you are interested in? Hey, what's the name of the pipeline? What exactly is the variable, the queue time variable that you have used? So you, as an admin, have all the information with the audit-only mode to go have a conversation with whoever is actually queuing the build with queue time variables. And then hopefully, you can get them actually, well, you can get them off this so that, when you do in fact turn on the policy at some point of time, their builds are not going to be broken and your pipelines are going to be in a much better state. So those are all the demos that I have today. So let's open it up for the audience to ask any questions. So.
All right, we've got some questions and comments online. Vijay, David, if any of those questions you answered in chat warrant additional comment, please feel free to comment on those.
So this is in relation to what you just showed. I just wanted to try and wrap my head around it. So from a cybersecurity perspective, could those variables be something like, enforcing your TLS 1.2 setting, or if it's a storage account, for instance, you want to enforce at an org level that it must require HTTPS or secure transfer. So are those kind of variables that you can configure?
These are pipeline variables.
Okay.
Now, Azure DevOps already enforces TLS 1.2 as the minimum standard. In fact, just 6 months ago that we deprecated support for 1.0 and 1.1. So these are variables that you're passing some information in your pipeline to run your pipeline. But once you allow somebody to set this queue time variables, potentially it's a attack vector, right? You don't know what kind of value that they are putting into those variables and how that will alter the behavior of your pipeline. You don't want that. Now, if you want some pipeline variables, then the pipeline author should really be making it part of the pipeline itself. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Hi, I had a question about the service connection creation.
Sure.
Are there any special requirements or permissions or configurations in order for ADO to create those service principals in AAD?
Great question. I'll ask my colleague Vijay to answer that. Vijay, did you hear the question?
Yes, I did. So if you want to use the automatic option that Rajesh demoed, you have to have high privilege on the Azure subscription, because that will automatically create the service principal and set the federated credential there. But if you do not have that owner privilege on the subscription, then use the manual mode. Get somebody who has that privilege to create the service principal on Azure, and then come back to Azure DevOps and then enter things like the client ID and stuff like that manually within the Azure DevOps portal.
All right, I see another hand over here, but in transition, I see a question there. Is there a way how to allow DevOps organization to be owned by more than one user, or could an owner be an AAD group?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So the owner is actually what we call a legacy concept, right? A few years ago, we made the owner of an organization in terms of privileges, or we made the project collection administrators on par with owners, right? In other words, if you are a project collection administrator, which you can add users, which you can put groups in it, you get the same privileges as a user, as a owner, right? In essence, that we are already supporting that. So if you want to add a group that can own a particular Azure DevOps org, all you need to do is open up the project collection administrator group, add the desired Azure AD group, which contains all of the right members, and you already are the owner of that org. So what we show as that one owner, the owner and the project collection administrators, they have equal privileges. So, yes.
We'll get you there. We'll get you there in the front row. We got a couple questions back here.
Sure.
The first question is to follow up on the variable creation at build time. Can I replace or change the value of a system variable at queue time?
Vijay?
Not if you enable that toggle that Rajesh showed. If you enable that toggle, you have to the pipeline author has to explicitly declare a variable as settable at queue time. So you will not be able to change the system variables in that case.
But
that in fact has been a security hole which some folks exploited in red team exercises.
And my other question will be, for those managed identities, do I have to apply a basic license, or will there be another licensing option for managed identities?
You can assign any of the existing licenses, like we have stakeholder, we have basic and test plans. It really depends on what your managed identity wants to do. So let's just say that your managed identity or the app that you're trying to use this managed identity for doesn't require access to a repo. All it's doing is reading work items. Now, reading work items, a stakeholder license is sufficient. So you should be able to assign a stakeholder license to that managed identity and being able to get on with whatever you wanted to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, while I'm transitioning, here's one comment I want to share from the chat. I wasn't expecting a master class in Azure DevOps tenant settings in this session, but it's very helpful to me.
Oh, it's great to hear that. Yeah.
I'm interested to know, how do I, at my Azure AD tenant level, how do I discover all the Azure DevOps organizations within that? Because I know people tend to create different orgs, they leave, and then there are all these orphaned orgs in the organization. So is there a way to discover all of them?
Yes. So, well, let's quickly go back to the demo that I showed you. Instead of speaking about it, I'll show you exactly how to do that. Right. So let's go back here. So remember that I was showing you about the tenant policies, right? You know, where you can go set up your personal access token and all, right? If you go to the top, see there is a button that says download organizations connected to this particular directory. If you download that, I'm going to download that for you. So this will tell you all Azure DevOps organization that's connected to your Azure Active Directory tenant. You will be able to open it up, and then you can see, okay, hey, which are these organizations that are production organizations, and which are the organizations that are not supposed to be there. So maybe I'll go and have a conversation. Now, a lot of customers, we have also shipped a feature, I think a couple of years ago, called, as you can see, it's called restrict organization creation. If you can see that, right? So most admins, right? If you are not using this policy, what happens is anybody can go create an Azure DevOps organization. If you use your corporate identity, guess what? The org that you created is already attached to to your company's tenant, right? We don't know what you put in there, you know, especially admins who worry about governance and compliance, they always worry about that. So what they do is they actually go turn it on. Now, this doesn't do anything to the orgs that are already created, so that's kind of what we call the brown field. But at least when you turn the restrict organization creation on policy and say that, hey, there's only a few people in my company who can do that, that's where the allow list comes into picture. When you do that, anybody else who is not part of this allow list, they will be blocked from creating an organization that's tied to your company, right? Now, if you're an admin who already has a bunch of these orgs, our recommendation is go talk to our support. Generally, what we help customers is we give one particular identity or a user access to all of these organizations, and then they can go and do their evaluation to see if something is a production one or something is a test one, so they can go do that cleanup. So.
Just to follow up on that, I know this has been asked for a while, but is there a way to, like, say I discover something and I want to consolidate or migrate projects into one organization? Is that something that's available now?
That is a top voted item in our developer community portal, and no, you can't do that. Well, you can do that natively, but there are some third-party tools that are available that you can use to, when you say, you know, merging projects, people are talking about is moving items from one project to another and kind of consolidating in that project. Sure, there's a lot, yeah. Yeah, natively, you know, we don't support that. It's really a hard problem to go solve for us. It's a big effort, but there are some third-party tools that you can use to come close to that, yeah. But you can't do that. You can't just, you know, take two projects and say merge into one. You can't do that, yeah. Or move that project from one organization to another, yeah.
Good, yep. All right.
In some situations, there's like a personal access token required. So like if you're adding a deployment target for like a deployment group or something, it gives you the option to add a personal access token to that. Is there a way to have it like automatically create that personal access token that's limited to the scopes that it's required to do? Because like I've set up some deployment groups and I just click the box that says full access because I know I'm only going to use the token for like five minutes, to just set up that server. Is there any like situation where we could just have that personal access token be created for that specific purpose?
That's a good question to Vijay. Vijay, did you get the question?
Sorry, I did not. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so in situations where like a personal access token is required for like a deployment group setup, is there a scenario where you could get that created automatically with the right scopes and timing so that you don't necessarily have to create, just I need to get this done. Let me just create a full access token. I don't want to look up what permissions this particular thing needs, as opposed to,
Yeah, I mean, specifically for agent registration scenarios like the ones you are talking about, like registering a deployment group agent or an agent pool agent and things like that, we are looking into avoiding the use of PAT altogether in order to do those registrations. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to become PAT free as much as possible. So that is a great example of an area that we will start using AAD tokens more and more instead of PAT tokens. And if there are other examples where you use PATs, I think we'll figure out how to start avoiding those if at all we can.
Okay, I know who's first back here.
Two pieces. The first on the project consolidation or organization consolidation. Even with the third-party tools, you're still, no matter what, going to lose pieces of information like your pull request history and your test run history that cannot come over whatsoever, I know, for hundreds of reasons. The second part is my group deals with the APIs very frequently, highly interested in being able to better isolate the scopes that those personal access tokens do need. But I've found the documentation tends to be not quite up to date to be able to tell you what, not just what roles the token needs, but also what authorization that account needs to be able to operate under to access those endpoints as well. Is there a movement to be able to bring that up to date?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, the first one, I hear you, right? Again, it's the top voted item in developer community. As I said, it's a really a hard problem, takes a lot of effort. That's why we're not, otherwise we would have solved the problem already. On the second question, we have improved our documentation a lot in the last few months. Especially what we did 6 months ago is, as we were rolling out these policies, we also found out that customers could not go turn on the tenant policy to block full scope PAT access because there are a few APIs that didn't have scopes, right? So we went and added a whole bunch of new scopes, or we mapped APIs to existing scopes so that customers don't ever need to actually go need a full scope token. And as part of that, we have also been updating our documentation. Today, I'm sure there are areas where you probably don't see it, but 95% of all of the API documentation you pull, if you scroll through that, you will see what scope that this API actually needs. So if you know that these are the APIs your app is consuming, that documentation should tell you what are the scopes that your PAT needs for your app to be successful. But if there are documentation you still see that are without a scope, let us know. We will definitely fix it.
Okay, and we have another question back here.
So for managed identities, if you have a suite of applications, can you use the same identity, or is it?
Sure. Oh yeah. So managed identity comes in two flavors. They're called system assigned and user assigned. System assigned is every time Azure starts a lifetime of a resource, in this case a VM, it assigns a specific identity to that. But you know that after the lifetime is over, that identity is gone. But you can create a user-assigned managed identity, and you can reuse that identity across many apps. Yeah.
All right, and I see we're about 10 minutes or so left. So with the questions in the chat, I see Michael Patch has raised his hand. Michael, you want to come off mute and ask your question? And then, yeah, that's probably going to be our best way to address the questions. There's a very long chat here, so if you want to... If you're online and you want to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll start with Michael.
Yeah, so probably have to type it in, the question.
Let me see if I can find Michael's question.
By the way, so our booth is in, do you know which 320?
321.
321, yes.
321.
Our booth is in 321. I know that it doesn't work for folks online. You can come to the booth to ask us questions. Send us, log your feedback in developer community portal. We will go take a look and we will try to get you answers. For people in this room, you can swing by. We'll be there in booth 321. If you have a burning question that we didn't get to, please feel free to come by the booth and ask us the question. We'll be there to answer that.
All right. I found one of Michael's questions.
Sure.
As an admin in the future, will I be given the ability to view PAT and SSH tokens in use by users in my Azure DevOps org and manage/revoke them?
Great question. So you can actually revoke them today, right? There are API. There's no UI today. There is what we call token administration APIs that are available. So you can actually go blanketly, knock off all of your users' tokens if you want. Will you be able to see all the paths? This is where I'm going to looking up to our partner teams like Defender for DevOps to kind of giving you that capability. So what Defender for DevOps is doing is one of the controls that they have is to give you visibility about how many paths are being used in your organization, who are actually using the path. So the answer is most likely not going to happen in Azure DevOps, but there are other tools in the Microsoft security ecosystem that you should be able to use to get that information. So.
All right. Let's see who else has.
By the way, so we are also going to introduce a new policy in the next 6 months as we now introduced managed identities and service principals. We are going to ensure that every one of the integration points, like the agent registration that Vijay talked about, works on an Azure AD token. So once we get to that state, we will also give a policy to admins that the admins can use to completely disable PAT usage across their company, right? So hopefully, what you need is, 6 to 12 months time. You have that policy. You should be able to enable the policy and get rid of PATs completely from your company. And that's what we are hoping for Microsoft, right? We are working across the company. Microsoft is, I shouldn't say this openly, but there are a lot of PATs in Microsoft. So we are also continuously pushing our own developers, our own apps, now that we have the managed identity support, to move out of PATs into managed identity. So.
And I see the second question that Michael highlighted here was actually from Jaswant. Is there an easy way to generate a DevOps user's access report with details and history?
Not so easily, unfortunately. So at the project level and the repo level, we do have a report that you can create that gives you all the people who have access to that repo, but not at different levels. You can still achieve the same. We have such a rich set of APIs that you can call at every level. You can find out which groups have access to the org, which users have access to the org. We have security APIs, and go find out what exactly is their permission. Everything is available, but if you're asking, do you have something built that leverages all of that? Unfortunately, no.
So you mentioned about.
Sorry, can you use the mic?
Yeah. Actually, let me ask Jaswant.
So we'll take 2 more questions. I want to be respectful of the next sessions coming in. So just 2 questions, and then.
Jaswant has his hand up. So was there a follow-up there, Jaswant, or can you should be able to. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, thank you. I can hear that. So basically, if you would like to review the overall organization security posture and how it is assigned, so is there a way that we generate a report and we can validate that thing at organization level for each user that has detail, including repos, up to repos, pipeline, and all the resources inside Azure DevOps?
Yeah, as I said, the answer is the APIs are available extensively for you to go collect that data. It's not that we are providing that data in one single place for you to consume that. Yeah.
Okay. We have one more question.
One more question, and then we'll wrap it up.
So we talked about managed identities being, replacing PAT. We have certain scenarios where we connect to Azure DevOps using an account in my Azure Active Directory to to a partner Azure DevOps environment and another. So how would the managed identity, if your Pat's going to go away, how would that sort of thing work?
So I don't know this about managed identity though, but for service principals, service principals can be home to multiple Azure Active Directory tenants. You can call them cross-tenant service principals, and you can use the cross-tenant service principals as a way to talk to an org that's tied to another tenant. It's quite possible. Yeah, I think we have some samples that we published, on the managed identity, talk about the specific scenario. Okay. Yeah, managed identities, the service principals has been around for a long time. So the support in the UI and the CLI, I think it's great. Managed identities, it's still coming up, right? The identity division, Microsoft Identity team is adding a lot of these capabilities. So, but there are some gaps, but I'm sure that they'll address it soon. So, thank you so much. Really appreciate talking to you. Yeah.